Hi, everyone. Welcome to the May Wireside Chat, where my guest is Mary Sangiovanni. I'm Paul Whitcover, the Associate Dean of the Online MFA, and I am super pleased to have Mary here as my guest today. Let me give her a little bio here. Mary Sangiovanni is an award-winning American horror and thriller writer of nearly 24 novels and novellas, including her most recent media tie-in novel for the Alien franchise, Enemy of My Enemy, her fan favorite Kathy Ryan series, and for Emmy, soon to be made into a film. Ooh, that's exciting. Let's talk about that later.
Excited.
She has also written short stories, comics for Marvel and DC. Would love to talk about that too, and nonfiction.
Sure.
Her work has been translated internationally. She has a master's degree in writing popular fiction from Seton Hill University. She has the distinction of being one of the first women to speak about writing at the CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, and offers talks and workshops on writing around the country. Born and raised in New Jersey, she currently resides in Pennsylvania with her husband, fellow writer Brian Keene, and her 5 cats. All right. That's a lot of cats, Mary.
It is a lot of. Brian is pretty much the only thing keeping me from being a crazy cat lady in the middle of rural
Did,
Pennsylvania.
did he set a
Yeah.
limit of at 5? That's it?
Well, he originally, I mean, he's a softie when it comes to pets, particularly cats and dogs. A fellow cat lady. Hello. And we had this little feral. She couldn't have been more than a year or two old, and she just kept having litters of kittens under our front porch. And the big softie kept feeding them and then finding them homes. I mean, I think we rehoused I somewhere between 30 and 40 kittens,
Oh
and
my
that, but
God.
yeah, it was a lot. And before we finally caught her and brought her in and got her fixed, and we have two of or three of her babies, and because
Okay.
they were just so cute, we just couldn't not. And then, and then my cat that, I had from before that. So
Right.
yeah, we're we're on some cat wall somewhere, for a good time, call the Keens, So
Right. Right. Well, there is a comment in here that says those are rookie cat numbers. So that that's that's somebody who's really serious about it. Well, I cats love me. They're just crazy about me because they know that I'm allergic to them, and they seek me out and they want to be my friend. So here's a
Okay.
question from Angel. So we'll just start there. Who inspired you to write?
Probably there were a couple of inspirations, and sometimes like sometimes you pick out the obvious ones, the ones that you know come to mind instantly, like Stephen King. Stephen King was the first author, probably the first horror author I really read, but was also the first author that I understood to write as a career. Like that was his job. And I don't know, when that little light bulb went off, I was like, oh wow, that sounds like a great job. That's what I want to do. But there was other one. Ramsey Campbell was a huge influence. John Carpenter. I'm a very visual
Mhm.
person. So when I write, I think they say obviously when you write, you try to engage all the senses, but I know that for me, the visual, the conveying the visual descriptions of things is important to me. Like it's one of those things I like about writing, one of the things I enjoy. And I think early on it was John Carpenter, who has a very sort of stylized approach to storytelling. It's a little bit jaded and um a little shady in some ways, but I would say that it was probably that. And I think before that it was probably fantasy. Like I did one of I was more I grew up reading more fantasy and science fiction than I did horror, until I hit maybe like 11 or 12, and I think that's when I discovered horror and horror
Mhm.
movies and Stephen King and VC Andrews all at the same time.
Oh yeah.
And I thought, this is what I want to do. Maybe not so much
Right.
the VC Andrews stuff, but only because I cruelty bothers me, and I think few people capture the cruelty of people to other people the way VC Andrews did.
Hmm.
But Stephen King, his books, they always gave me what I came to think of as like the Friday night feeling. You know, that feeling when you're done with work for the week and you're going to go out with your friends and have adventures, and
I-
um, that's the feeling I get reading his old stories. There was like a joy of just telling stories, telling fun, scary stories, and
mhm.
that's what I wanted to do. That to me, that's what I'd like to do.
And I'm kind of going to refer to your backdrop there, your cosmic backdrop,
My cosmic backdrop.
and of course, you've been labeled the queen of cosmic horror. So what is cosmic horror? What is your attraction to it, and how can you differentiate that from, like, I don't know, horror, like, like that written by the writers that you mentioned, or were they all also writing cosmic horror? I mean, I guess the thing
Some of
would
them,
sort of count as cosmic horror.
the thing, absolutely. The thing was caught, and the thing was the first, like probably one of the thing, and In the Mouth of Madness.
Hmm.
In the Mouth of Madness is a direct love letter to H.P. Lovecraft. So,
Right.
um, and that I think had a significant impact on me. Um, Stephen King does write a fair bit of cosmic horror, but I think at the time, like when he was publishing, when he first broke big, I think to him he was just writing supernatural horror. I don't even think for a while they called it that. I think early on he was just writing weird fiction, which is what Lovecraft was doing, and uh, a lot of the contemporaries, Arthur Machen and even Robert E. Howard, wrote some cosmic horror. But
Sure.
I've given it some thought. I used to do this podcast where um, I examined things that were cosmic horror, and then found, over time I found some basic qualities that, or basic four basic qualities that to me defines cosmic horror. The first one is that the antagonistic force, it doesn't have to be an evil force. And in fact, in cosmic horror, it often isn't evil. It's just
Right.
it's indifferent, right?
Yes.
Uh, it's like the personification of a black hole, right? It's something of such a huge scope that it dwarfs everything about humanity, from their loftiest goals and their noblest purposes to the evilest things that, like, it's almost everything we do is pointless at that, because the scope of this thing is just so large and incomprehensible. The second thing, of course, is that nihilistic attitude that what we're doing, that humanity is dwarfed by this thing. It's almost insignificant. Now, a lot of cosmic horror, modern cosmic horror, has tended to reframe that, because even if people are faced with a hopeless situation where in the grand scheme of things it doesn't really matter, there's still people that matter more to a heroic type than they do to themselves, so there's still a reason to fight.
Right.
I think you know traditional cosmic horror tended to maybe not dwell so much on characters because of that insignificance of humanity, but modern cosmic horror leans into the idea of the other and characters, and still, even with that reframing of humanity's significance for whatever it could be, even then it's still dwarfed by whatever this antagonistic force is. The
Right.
third point, and these two last points to me are the things that differentiate good cosmic horror, even competent cosmic horror, from great cosmic horror. Like in my opinion, competent cosmic horror will have one of these, two of these. Good cosmic horror has three of these. Great cosmic horror has four. And the last two are hard to sometimes really capture. The third one to me is fluidity. Um, Cosmic horror itself is such a fluid genre that it can incorporate other subgenres of horror into it very easily. But there's always a sense of fluidity, whether it's time or space or a sense of place, or the mind. Insanity is really the fluidity of logical and ordered thinking, right? Or the body. There's a lot of body horror, cosmic horror,
Yep.
where people change into things. But there's always that sense of fluidity, and what it says, the horror of that is that rather than in fantasy where that might, inspire a sense of awe or wonder, in horror, what it underlines is the idea that you can't count on anything. There is no security in life. You can't even count on reality to be safe and secure and stable and consistent, because this underlying force can change all that. You can't even rely on yourself to remain consistent. And then the fourth thing, and this one I think, like the greatest cosmic horror really kind of touches on this, is that there are fates that can be worse than death.
Right.
uh, that maybe, death, not only is death not the end, but it's not even a sense of peace or a sense of release or anything like that. It's really, there are things that could be much, much worse. And that pretty much works for me. That, and I think, there's a lot of tropes from Lovecraft that work their way into cosmic
Yeah.
horror, that when people think of cosmic horror, they think of cults, they think of, interdimensional portals, which I do love a good interdimensional portal. But the other consistent thing to me seems to be that setting is as absolutely as important as character. And that
Right.
goes all the way back to proto cosmic horror stuff like, Arthur Machen and Robert W. Chambers, all the way up to modern cosmic horror. That setting is absolutely is a crucial element, as important as any character, maybe even
Yeah.
more important
Maybe
than the characters.
a kind of character, even, you could say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's super interesting. And I think I think you're absolutely right that cosmic horror, I think, has become maybe tied to the popularity of Lovecraft,
Hmm.
which is kind of amazing because we were talking earlier about when we were younger writers and kind of coming up, Lovecraft was he had not yet broken out into the mainstream in the way that he has now. Um, but I think, as Lovecraft has come into the mainstream, he brought with him or dragged with him a lot of those elements of cosmic horror that you just mentioned. And I think
Hmm.
it's infused a lot of horror in one way or another
Oh yeah.
today, and in films, in video games, and in literature as well, of course.
It's such a versatile subgenre of horror that, I think sometimes people are writing it and they don't even know it,
Yeah,
because they are capturing that uh, that fluidity, or that idea that, that things can be outside of our knowing. I think Lovecraft was he was the biggest accomplishment that Lovecraft did is that he transcended fiction writing and created mythology. There are people
yeah,
that believe that the Necronomicon is a real book, but
right. I did for a
you
long
can,
time when I was a
yeah. I mean,
kid.
he's and he did that by inviting other people to share in his world. And there's almost that idea that sanity is just what the majority believes.
Right.
So, there's, I think he did a sort of brilliant thing in that he almost established his work as mythology. Now, that being said, not only was he a very problematic person in terms of how he viewed other people, part of that being just the, I think, xenophobia, part of it being a xenophobia that was, I think, bordering on perhaps mental illness.
He was
But
mentally ill, I think.
yeah, yeah, and some of it was just, the times, but and there are sort of stilted things that he did, but I think most people who like cosmic horror can at least acknowledge that he crystallized a form of weird fiction writing that has endless possibilities. And that's what I like about it, is that following the basic principles, that I outlined before, you can do almost anything with that. You can pull
Sure.
almost anything into cosmic horror and have it work. And I think Lovecraft is one of those writers that you kind of have to read. You can't read him too young, or it comes across as stiff and stilted. Uh, and you can't read him too old, because I think otherwise you I think if you hit that sweet spot, maybe like late 20s, early 30s, and you discover Lovecraft and The King in Yellow, Robert Chambers, um, I think then you can see where the genius is there, you know?
Yeah. I think I was too old for Robert E. Howard. I think I didn't hit him at the right spot. Or I'm sorry, for Lovecraft. I did hit Robert E. Howard at the right spot. He
Yeah, yeah.
was a big influence of mine. But um, I guess I don't want to spend the whole time talking about Lovecraft and cosmic horror, but I mean, I think one thing that has occurred to me about Lovecraft is just as, like, a kind of obscure writer, like, named Franz Kafka, somehow seemed to, like, almost be prescient about the world that was going to succeed him, and in some
Hmm.
ways seemed almost to predict it, or at least certain elements of it, or the vibe of it. I feel like Lovecraft was tuned into something in a similar way, and that we are part of the reason that he's broken through into the mainstream is that we're kind of living in that world now,
Oh yeah.
that world of cosmic horror. I mean, it's, you're soaking in it, as that old TV
Hmm.
commercial would say. Do you think that's true?
I do. I think science is starting to show that the universe is more complicated than we at first thought, which leads to the possibility of alternate parallel dimensions, universes, however however you see the multiverse, I guess, in a way.
Right.
Uh, I think that there's always been, I think, a tug of war between science and the horrors and benefits of science, and also religion and the horrors
Yeah.
and benefits
Well,
of
that's
religion.
all there in Frankenstein, right? All
It's
right at
exactly,
the
and I
start.
think with Lovecraft it ebbed and flowed. Like Lovecraft was an atheist, or I think at least an agnostic. Pretty sure he was an atheist. So in his mind, he wasn't writing about fantastical monsters, but more like alien type things.
Mhm.
But I do think that there's a tug of war in his work between uh, the comfort and horror of religion and the comfort and horror of modern science. And I think that's reflected in society all the time. Like every time we cure a disease, then and we develop some medical thing that can prolong a life in some way, then there's an attendant number of problems and questions about how how those how what can go wrong now that we can do
Mhm.
this. We learn how to break through the atmosphere and explore space. Now, oh my god, what are the horrible things that are out there? Every time there's political upheaval, current event upheaval, horror has a boom, because
Right.
anytime we learn to do something new, then we're essentially standing on the edge of the void again. And
Yep.
there's a lot of room and I think Lovecraft knew that. I think, in his mind, if you stay stagnant in one place, you decay. But if you move forward, then you absolutely face the unknown, and maybe that's worse,
Yeah.
you know?
All right. Let me turn to writing. Um, and this is a question I'm pulling out of the chat.
Okay.
Do you outline extensively or discover the story as you write? In other words, the old plotter versus pantser question.
I'm an absolute pantser. My process drives my friends crazy. I will write the scene that in my mind is what the book is really about. If it's a description of the monster, if it's a description of like that moment when they recognize what the real horror of the situation is that they're in. It could be a clip, little snippet of dialogue. Usually it's a description of a monster that to me, like when they finally understand that this is the scary thing about the book, and then
Yeah.
from there I jump around. I write what I think of as all the fun scenes. So usually the scary scenes,
Okay.
and then I go back to the beginning and I try to connect all the scary scenes. But by then, because I've found that and I have done books this way, I don't love it, but I have done books chronologically. But if I push through from beginning to end chronologically, then certain scenes seem like, oh, I just want to get through this so I can do the next fun part, If
Right.
I do it my way, then by the time I get to those little bridging scenes, I can think of new ways to inject new life into them so that they're not just like that boring part you have to get to until you get to like the next scary part. So I'm
What about
definitely a pantser.
what about though when you're doing like work for hire or in another IP, like when you did the alien stuff, were you able to write that way, or did they insist that you present them with an outline?
They, particularly for the Alien franchise, so the Alien is Titan is the publisher that is licensing the right to write Alien books, right? So they have to check with 20th Century Fox, who owns the rights to Alien, but Disney owns 20th Century Fox. So I had to have I had to give them a pitch, then I had to give them a very clear-cut outline where I had to go chapter by chapter and explain
Mhm.
every important thing that happens in each chapter. I had to wait for them to run that up the flagpole all the way to Disney and then all the way back down again and approve that. And then I had to check in with my senior editor and send him chapter by chapter what I was doing.
Wow.
So that was a very regimented process. I mean, there's a lot of in media tie-in. I mean, it was a fascinating experience because I love the Alien franchise, and I was so excited to add to it because they were making a push then to have everything be very consistent. They wanted the video games and the television show and the movies, and everything to be in a consistent shared universe. So they gave me everything you could possibly think of. I got movie Bibles. I got a timeline of every character that's ever been in any of the video games or movies or anything, going from 2012 to like 23, 27. I
Wow.
got links to videos where people had mapped out the galaxy and what government owned what part of everything. Um, I had fact checkers. So, like, I had originally written a part of the book where the little chest burster, was hanging on to something by his little claws, right? And they told me, no, you can't do that. When chest bursters come out, if you watch the first Alien movie, when chest bursters come out, they don't have arms. So
Mhm.
they caught that. Another thing is I mentioned one of the soldiers had worked as a guard at the prison planet in the third movie. And they did the math and caught that when I said the soldier was there was a year after the place closed. So I couldn't do that. So
Wow.
I mean they were on top of every little detail. It was fascinating. But within that, they let me get away with stuff that actually changed continuity to
Mhm.
the point where now then the last thing they sent me was a form that I had to check where they had outlined all of my characters, their birth dates, their death dates, when they had calculated that their children were born, when they had calculated that these people were married, when they would have gone to the academy, when they got the jobs that they held. And it was fascinating because now the characters I created for them, although I don't have the rights to them, are official canon
Yeah.
characters in the Alien universe. And I thought, like, how cool is that to
That is
contribute
all. That is
to
awesome.
to one of the properties you love, to one of the
Yes.
properties that made you want to be a horror writer. Like
Yes.
it was so much fun. And the comic book stuff is the same way. I was not a comic book reader growing up. I mean, I watched all the shows. Like I watched this, Christopher Reeve's Superman. I watched the Hulk and Wonder Woman and Batman, and all those 70s shows, like versions of those. But to me, like people would talk about comic books, and I hear wah, 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 but my husband is a huge comic book fan, and he had done some work for DC and Marvel at the time, and he was friends with Keith Giffen. Keith Giffen,
Mhm.
for folks who are not familiar with him, uh, created a lot of characters in the 70s, including Rocket Raccoon from the Guardians of the Galaxy movie. And having met Keith, like Keith basically just wrote himself in raccoon form. Like that was Keith Giffen, most definitely. But Keith and Brian wanted to put together a horror comic book where rather than tapping comic book writers, they would tap horror writers to take major characters in the DC universe, Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, and have them make those characters into monsters and have like write like a what if horror version of these stories. And DC went for it and they assigned me Wonder Woman. So I
Oh,
got
that's
to write,
great.
it was so cool. I got to write Wonder Woman, um, who possesses the body of a trans woman and goes on a murder spree.
Mhm.
And it's just like this Amazon warrior killing people who got in her way. And it was so much fun. It was really great. And then my editor at Kensington moved over to Marvel. So the problem with comics is that like unless you are relentlessly hounding them,
Yeah,
not it's hard to keep getting work in
yeah.
comics, you like they because comics, the whole industry, it's almost like they find ways to shoot themselves in the foot. It's really sort of fascinating. But anyway, my editor had moved to Marvel and he said we're doing a couple of what ifs, like the what if, one off kind of things.
Mhm.
Pitched me something for what they called Black, White, and Red. It was a zombie comic series this is like the zombie virus had been unleashed on the Marvel universe, and the whole comic series is in black and white except for the blood. All the
Cool.
blood is red, and I could be these were like R-rated comics. They weren't like usually comics for Marvel or like T for teen. These were R-rated comics, so I could be violent. And I pitched Shauna the She-Devil, who was, I
Mm.
guess, like a side character in,
Sure,
uh,
Kazar.
and yeah, exactly. And they went for it. And I had someone basically give me a template of what a comic book script looked like, and with a little shepherding. I'd done the DC one, so it's a different type of writing than short story writing because um, you you can't show like two different motions in the same panel. But other than that, like you almost have this freedom to just create panel art that tells a story as much as anything you're saying or writing. So it was a fascinating skill to learn because it's a different approach to storytelling. So I did Shaun of the She-Devil, and then I think a couple years later they did a like a vampire invasion what if kind of series that was like Marvel, like comic wide across all the Marvel comics. And they wouldn't let me play with the big toys like Blade,
Yeah, yeah.
but they let me play with Satana,
Oh,
who is
okay.
the daughter of Satan. And they did let me work in where she's got these vampires invading her bar and she's trying to get Blade on the phone, and it keeps going to voicemail because Blade is busy in like the main storyline. So it was a lot of fun. And I would say if you get a chance to do comic work, even for indie comics, um, definitely do it because it's a lot of fun. Uh, Comics, so the way it works, just to give, because I saw a comment pop up about how that works. So
Mhm.
the comics I was doing were because it was just the one story in it, like almost like a collection of stories, for the one comic. I got a 10-page script, so I had to do a 10-page script. uh I got paid $80 a page, which is the low rate for newbies because considered a newbie in comics, even though I've been writing for 25 years. Um, and basically, for that money, I got that work for about 3 days of work. I could do a comic book page and a half, maybe two comic book pages, uh, in a day. So or probably even more. I think a couple times I did 3 or 4 pages a day because sometimes, the page is just a splash page, which is basically just one huge page size picture of something going on. Uh, and so word wise, it'd be hard to tell word wise because basically what you're doing in a comic book script is that you're breaking each page down into the number of panels that's going to be on the page, and then you're describing what the art should look like for the artist, and then you're putting whoever is speaking in a separate little line on a like at the like you'll have like Satana colon and then whatever she's saying, and you have to be mindful that like what you can't have these long diatribes because you have to be able to fit the word balloons and not cover up the art, So there's little things to consider, but it's actually very little dialogue writing, for what you're doing. It's more describing how you want the layout to look and how you can use the art direction and the dialogue that you're incorporating or any like voiceover type stuff that you're incorporating to tell the story. Now, I don't have access to the art. I mean, I'm not doing like a fully if I'm being hired to do something for Marvel or DC, there's another artist that they've already hired that they're working with, and the artist has more or less final say. Like they'll come back to me and be like, we can't fit this, can you rework the dialogue a little bit? But ultimately the artist is drawing what I told them the panel should look like for and there's usually I think three three or four panels across and then 2 rows, so that you've got like, panel 1, panel 2, like you'll say like maybe 3 rows, 3 panels each. Like that would be a big full page, right? And then you describe what's happening in each panel, and sometimes you can have panels bleed into other panels, and you have a little bit of creative license there. Sometimes the panel is just a closer version of the person's face because you're getting like their eyes and stuff, but all of that is a very visual storytelling medium. So I think it appealed to me because I was able to tell the story as much with the pictures as with the dialogue.
Right. Well, you mentioned earlier that you are a visual storyteller, so it
Yeah.
seems like a natural fit.
And it's a lot of fun. I mean, the media tie-in thing was great. The comics tie-in was great. And for people who want to be career writers, like because so much of this is the hustle of bringing in new work almost before you've even finished the thing you're working on, it's good if you can have a toolbox, a skill set that involves being able to adapt your work or other people's work across multiple storytelling media, so if you can write short, and I think that's going to be more important even going forward, that the storytelling process might be that you write a novel, but that you also are able to adapt it to a comic book script or a video script, or to understand what people are looking for who may want to option it for TV or streaming or movies or whatever the case is. Audio plays. I've had stuff adapted to audio plays that I've done, short stories, and that's a whole other kind of medium because people are acting out what you're saying, and the dialogue is absolutely important.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me in what you were just talking about that I want to kind of point out or underscore for our attendees is first of all, the importance of relationships, right? Like you had a relationship with your editor at DC, they moved over to Marvel, you wound up getting work at Marvel. So these kinds of relationships are important to like nurture. If you've got them,
Absolutely.
nurture them. If you don't have them, get them. And how do you get them? Well, you marry a writer who loves comic books like Mary did, or you go, you hang out at comic conventions and you kind of meet people that way. And the other thing is, the writer or the editor at Marvel said to Mary, pitch me something. I've got a project. I thought of you for it. Pitch me. So now it's on you, and you have to come up with a pitch. So you got to be ready, very quickly.
Yes.
Because I'm sure in a situation like that, Mary, you're not able to say, yeah, I'll get back to you next week, or I'll get back to you in a month. No, you have to
Hmm.
pitch like, I'll get back to you tomorrow. Here's my pitch.
Right.
So
Right.
what skills can people learn in order to hone that ability to pitch something really quickly?
I think part of it is it's a confidence thing. When they asked me to do the Wonder Woman, and even to this, to some extent, like after I'd pitched Shaun of the She-Devil, which I'd only ever heard of because of my husband. Like I'd never even read those comic
Mhm.
books. Um, a lot of times an opportunity will pop up where either somebody comes to you or the thing just opens up, right? And don't be afraid to learn the skill. Like don't not pitch something because you're like, well, I've never done it before. I don't know how to do it. You can learn how to do it fairly quickly. And one of the ways you can do it is to be involved in the community of your genre. Um, a lot of this, because it's an entertainment field, all things being considered, I mean, editors and agents, they're people too. So go to the conventions, go to the trade shows that your genre is having if you can do it. Even if it's just an online thing, if you can't afford to go. A lot of conventions now and a lot of professional organizations are offering like scholarships for people who can't afford to say fly to wherever the convention is going. You can apply for that. But that sort of face time with the people making the decisions to buy things is crucial. And if you can't do that, then I would suggest getting involved online in your communities. If you are doing things where you can cross promote with somebody, or you're getting involved in chats, um, even this, like I've had students where something about their work has struck me and I've recommended editors to them. I've recommended conventions. Like one of the students I had last semester wanted to get into doing comic book and video game writing. Well, there's a convention called Convergence, and it's big. It's a huge convention when it comes to the people who actually write the scripts for video games, the people who write role-playing games. That's the one they go to. That's their trade show. So yeah, so if you want to do video game writing, I would definitely recommend Convergence. It's once a year. I believe it's in Minneapolis, maybe. But you can find it online, and uh it you go there, and for the most part, like people are friendly. Like a lot of people in speculative fiction, like we were all kind of nerds at some point, so we know what it feels like to go to a convention for the first time and not know anybody. So especially in horror, I know people will go out of their way to be like, "Hey, are you new? Come sit with us. Come have lunch with us." Or what kind of stuff do you write? And sometimes it's just a matter of you know hanging out one night, at the bar or at a restaurant, or sitting on a rock outside of the hotel and just talking to people, and then they'll remember, oh hey, so and so does body horror. I have this body horror anthology coming up. Let me ask her. Let me see if she, wants to do this. Or, so and so is doing, military thrillers. Oh, hey, I know something good. Because editors will start asking writers and other editors that they trust. I need a diverse table of contents here. I want to start asking other people, who should I be asking? Who's plugged into this type of writing at this time? And we recommend writers to each other all the time. I've always told people too that if I can help you, if I've read your work and I like your stuff, and you need an introduction, say, a lot of new writers, they don't want to look like they're using us. They don't want to look like they're uh, trading on knowing us. I'm okay with that. And I think a lot of editors too, like they recognize, a lot of writers too, they recognize that because this is an entertainment field, you can cut through months and months and months of waiting simply by talking to people and asking them questions and asking, um, you know, who's publishing what. it's really a good way to, I can't recommend networking enough, and we have here at SNHU, we have a writing community, where you can get your feet wet doing that. And then, you talk to people in your genre, like, this is what I'm writing. Who do you recommend I send it to? Because the other thing too is that if there are people that are predatory, or they're known for not paying their writers on time, or they don't have great marketing or whatever, like, we'll tell you that too. We may not say it publicly, but if you hit us up one by individually, we'll tell you, and no, stay away from that agent. That agent's no good. This agent is fantastic. This publishing house, they'll do right by you. Send it here.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of writers come into our program, or any program really, with a sense that there's a kind of a competition going on between writers, but that's really not the case by and large.
Right.
And I think, I teach 505 in the program, which is the course that students take when they first come into the program. And one of the things that we talk about in there is networking. And a lot of students, just like you pointed out, are very, very averse to the idea of doing networking because they feel that there's something untoward about it, that they're
Right.
manipulating the other person, or they're using them, they're being fake,
Right.
there's nothing genuine about it. But really, I feel like that's not the case. And you can form genuine relationships with fellow writers and lovers of your genre, and there's nothing fake about that. And as you point out, you're suddenly immersed in that world, and things open up for you. It's not because you
Absolutely.
manipulated people; it's because you've you've
You've earned it.
become you've earned it. Yeah, you've
Yeah.
become a friend, and you're doing the same for other people, right? It's not like you're just
Exactly.
taking. You're giving back to the other writers who are just starting out, giving back to the
Right.
community.
Yeah, you're paying it forward. And you have to remember too, like, I get why people think it seems transactional, but if there were people who helped me when I was new, they taught me the ropes, they taught me how to do things. There were glass ceilings, particularly for women in
Yeah,
horror, for a long time. So without people uh, taking the risk, putting their reputation on the line to say, Mary can do this, give her a shot, uh, I would have, I think it would have taken me much longer to get where I was. If I have faith in your writing, you're not using me. I'm willing to vouch for you to somebody, because a rising tide lifts all boats. If a
right.
publisher publishes something great, and and honestly, if I could say, hey, yeah, that's because of me. I recommended that person. Yeah, that was me. Like, it's good for all of us. So I don't think, um, I don't, I understand why people are uncomfortable to do it, but it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be particularly competitive. I saw a question. I do know Sylvia. I don't know her well. Um, we're acquaintances. I think we've met once or twice, and she's very nice and she's very talented.
Yeah.
And I saw someone else asked about like gothic sort of romantic horror, particularly with the Wuthering Heights movie coming out, and
Mm.
I have a feeling it's blowing up pretty big. I think now is a great time to start sending, to start publishing that stuff. If you're writing that stuff, now is a great time to be sending it out. Um, I know that, and when I think of Gothic, I think of Gwendolyn Keist, and I'm pretty sure that she submits to um, Simon and Schuster. You do need an agent for that. But see, that's the other thing too. There's a lot of things, like, you look at guidelines and it says we're not looking at submissions now, or you can't send this if you don't have an agent. Sometimes networking with other writers, or networking with the agents themselves or the editors themselves, you can approach them in such a way that they'll be like, ah, that's okay. You can send it anyway. I've done that. I've had people basically, I've contacted people that before I had an agent who didn't take unsolicited submissions. I mean, they didn't take submissions that an agent wasn't brokering. And I said, I'm friends with Christopher Golden. He thought that what I'm working on might be a good fit for you. Is it okay if I send this? And at least half the time they said, sure, go ahead and send it.
Yeah.
So the other thing too is not it is not being afraid to be bold. You are the best representative for your own work, so you should, you shouldn't be. The worst they can do is say no. It's almost, I mean, unless you're a horrible, horrible person, a predatory, horrible person, there's not a whole lot you can do to get blacklisted, I guess. A lot of people are afraid they're going to burn bridges behind them. Fortune favors the bold, as long as the bold is professional and polite,
Right.
But yeah, you can do it. And if you're afraid to do it, talk to other writers who are writing what you're doing, who are publishing what you're doing. Talk to like Christopher Golden. Sean said that's his new favorite writer.
Hmm.
Chris is awesome. And Chris is an absolute, his House of Last Resort novel, um, that was his newest novel. We basically threw him a party to get the numbers to go up. Like, this is what other writers do. He said that he was very nervous that the sales numbers wouldn't be there, that the publisher would be on with the sales numbers. So we literally threw him a mini convention to get readers to come in and buy the books, and his sales numbers shot up. Like, these are the kinds of things people will do for each other. And the reason we were willing to do that for Chris is because Chris has been a tireless advocate for other writers, for other horror writers. He's always been incredibly supportive, incredibly generous with his time. And I think a lot of writers are, I think a lot of writers are, they know that this business isn't easy, and if they can do something to help, they will.
Yeah. It's definitely not a zero-sum game. That's for sure.
Exactly.
All right, here's an interesting question from Angel. What does it mean if others like your voice, tone, style as a new author? Actually, I'm not quite sure. Angel, can you rephrase that question? I'm not quite sure I understand what you're asking. And meanwhile, we'll go on to this question. My goal is to be an editor. Is there something particular writers look for when sending their books out to be checked? Like,
For me,
yeah.
I could tell you what I look for. I have a, I have a, the most important thing to me for an editor is somebody who understands that uh, they want to make my book the best possible version of my voice as possible. You can tell when an editor is editing you in a way that is either so very much by the grammar rule book that they haven't read a whole lot of other people's style, um, or worse, that they're rewriting it the way they would write it because they're writers too. So I look for an editor that understands that their job is to make it the best possible version of my work as possible. I look for somebody who can catch continuity errors, who can, more so even than grammar, because I have a very extensive background in, grammar and writing. I mean, I taught basic writing skills for a long time. So I mean, or I will catch it. I'm looking more for somebody who um, understands some degree of developmental editing, which is basically making sure uh, that the characters ring true, that it's consistent. I also, I mean, this is a little thing. I look to make sure that any interaction I have with the editor, that their grammar doesn't have typos, that it doesn't have grammar mistakes. Um, I
Yeah.
look to see that they're well read, because I feel that part of understanding writer's voice is having read enough different types of, diverse types of writers to understand that everybody approaches an idea differently, and that they've read enough to have some experience in what good writing is. I also look, and maybe this is an old lady thing to say, but I also look to see if those editors, if they've read anything older than, like, say, 2010. I look to see who their influences are. Are they reading widely? Are they reading new folks as well as, all the old classics from like 100 years ago? I look for them to be a well-rounded editor that I can put my trust in, because they're going to be, theoretically, I'm trusting them first with, my creative, baby, I guess. But once it's done, I'm trusting them with a product that I want to make me look good as a writer. So in order to trust them, I need to know that they know what they're doing. And mostly I see that in the kind of edits they send back to me. Like, what if they're catching things I'm not catching, if they understand the nuances of storytelling, mostly, and mostly you get that just by reading widely.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a tough profession to level up to, right? Because, so much of editing, and I've worked as an editor at Time Warner and as a freelance editor as well. So much of like becoming good at it is, I mean, you have to practice, and where do you get your practice? Well, you have practice on people's books. And
Yep.
you might at first make some mistakes, and that's it's tough because you're, like you said, Mary, you're dealing with Mary's hopes and dreams and her career
Mm-hmm.
here. And so you got to do the best you can.
Exactly.
You can't just hang your shingle out. You can't say like, well, I'm in the MFA, I've taken a few courses, I'm going to hang my shingle out as an independent editor. Well, you're not going to be serving your clients very well, I don't think, if you do that. You need to get more experience. Fortunately, like workshopping is a good place to start to develop some
Workshopping
editorial
is,
chops.
yep. And there's a lot of writers, particularly on Facebook. You see a lot of writers looking for second readers. Um, that's something where, they're basically just looking for a reader, ostensibly somebody with some writing or editing experience, who can read through the book and give them feedback almost in a generalized sense. So that might be a good place to start too, because
Mhm.
then if they get used to you being their second reader, then, you can sort of build a resume of, yes, I was a second reader for this person, I edited this. They tend to, writers recommend editors too. We do it all the time. We recommend people that we know are good editors, particularly if people are self-publishing.
Yeah.
A good editor's like a good cover artist, a good editor is hard to find. Once we find one, we share it with everybody.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I feel like, self-publishing can be expensive, right? And
Oh
a
yeah.
lot of writers who self-publish, or writers period, are not loaded with cash. So they're looking for,
Mhm.
they're trying to do it on the cheap, basically. And certainly, there are places where you want to cut corners, maybe. But editing is not one of them. So if you're budgeting to self-publish your work, think about, leaving yourself enough to hire a good editor, because that's going to
Absolutely.
pay off times
A
10.
good a good editor, and you want a good cover artist.
Yeah, those are
You
the two
want
most important
somebody who
things, I think.
understands. Yeah. And if you're not sure who to ask, ask in your genre, ask who's doing the cover art, like, whose cover art you like, whose cover art other people like, and which ones are, because there's an art to doing that not everybody,
Mhm.
really has a handle on, but it definitely makes a difference.
So before we're coming to the end of our hour, and I realize like we never talked about your movie. So let's talk about your movie a little bit.
So, okay, so I had this, and I'll try to give the Cliff Notes versions. I had this theory that, we talked a little bit about how, moving forward, uh, in your career, to have this sort of financial security, and to keep getting work, you you need to sort of expand your audience base, right? You're always kind of looking to build your audience steadily. It can be slow, but you want it to be slow and steady. And I noticed that particularly in horror, and this could be different in other genres, but there's a difference in fandoms between the people who watch horror movies and the people who read horror literature. The people who read horror literature often watch horror movies, but it doesn't always work the other way around. And but there is a certain, I think, idea that if you have a movie or even an option for something or a television series, whatever the case is, um, it's usually more money than a small press advance. So you have a certain financial security that way. But it's also, I think, it's a sign to sort of the bigger powers that be that there's interest in your work. So I know that a lot of people when they go to get something optioned, that they either have their agent do it or they've gone out to, they know people in Hollywood and they've set up appointments. I know sometimes, like for the horror writers, the Stoker Awards, sometimes Sony will go out there, or Netflix or Amazon Prime. They'll send representatives out there to talk to the horror writers to see what's going on in horror. For me, I was looking for something that could sort of serve as a calling card, because one of the things I noticed about Hollywood, and I mean this with, you know, with love and respect here, but they're like lemmings. If I say something nice about a horror movie I saw, and the director sees it and the director likes it or retweets it or friends me, that week I'll get a slew of directors following me on something. Um, or if I mention an actor, that I think is really great, and that actor likes it, I'll get a bunch of actors suddenly following me. And so my thinking was, I approached this independent filmmaker that I knew, and I said, how would you feel if I were to sell you the option to this fairly cheap? Because I'm not thinking of this as more as from a money standpoint, so much as showing the world that I have work that's adaptable to movies.
Mhm.
What would you think of it? I said, now there's no pressure, but I'll send you the novella. If you like it, we can talk about it. Well, he read the novella. It was a novella called For Emmy, and it's about where people go when they go missing. And he not only did he love it, but he got it. Like, he was telling me, oh, I'd film this scene this way and I'd do this way, and it was exactly how I saw it in my head when I was writing it.
Wow.
And I thought, this is like a perfect match. Now, Hollywood is a lot of hurry up and wait, so you you're never really, like, you can never really be sure that anything movie wise is going to happen until the movie is out and in the
Right.
theaters or on the streaming service, because there's a million things that can go wrong between somebody saying, yes, I'd like to adapt this, and it actually coming out. But he he's somebody that I know kind of well personally, and I know he's working on it. So it's going to take a while. Like, it's not going to be any time in the near future, but we did talk about, like, getting a budget together. We've talked about, how we're going to get the funds together. We talked about how we're going to do certain scenes and script. So it's, I guess, in development. It would be
Okay.
the thing right now. And I'm so excited about it because I love movies. I love
Yeah.
horror movies. And I think there are a few things as gratifying as seeing your work, you know, interpreted by another creative person. So keeping
Yeah.
the fingers crossed that it all goes smoothly and we see something
100%.
maybe
100%.
next year. So
100%. All right, so I'm gonna close out with one more question from Angel here. What does it mean if people like your work but you do not? And she goes on to say, I'm writing a dark fantasy, and though it is lyrical, gothic, and dark, I do not think it's enough.
I think that the harshest critic for any book you write is going to be you, and that you can actually rewrite and edit all of the joy and love and life out of something if you can't let it go. I Now, for me, I'll write something and I edit as I write, as I go, so it's pretty much how I want it to sound by the time I get to the end of it. I might do one pass to check for typos, and after that, I let it go. I send it out to the publisher, the agent, whatever the case is, and I don't think about it until I get, edits back from the editor. Because otherwise, I would nitpick this thing for so long that it would never come out. And I think that's the thing. You develop the longer you write, the more years you put into this, the more you write, the more you read, you develop a sense for whether something is working in terms of, yes, I can tell a pretty good story and I can probably sell it. And something that really is just not gelling. It's just not coming together the right way because you've got the pieces, but maybe the pieces don't all belong together. And you learn, you have to, it takes time, but you learn instinctively to trust your gut. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to love everything you do. There are what a lot of writers refer to as the bill payers, which are books that you write that are competent and they're okay, but they're not great. But I'll tell you that some of my most popular books with readers and fans are the ones I don't like. Or I shouldn't say I don't like them, but they're like my least favorite of everything I've written.
Mhm.
And yet people absolutely love them. I think they're not as competent as they're not as good as I can do. I could have done better. And
Yeah.
yet these I've seen reviews for them where people are like, I wouldn't change this thing. This is like my favorite book. It's so you're not, even if you don't like it, it doesn't mean that your readers won't absolutely love it. You know, um, you just have to like it enough to finish it. If
Yeah.
that makes sense. Like it
I
enough to finish it and send it out, and then trust the gods of reading and writing to do the rest.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great point about letting go. You have to let go at a certain
You have to
point.
let go.
Um, I at a certain point I learned to really stop caring about my work, which doesn't mean, I mean, that sounds like a horrible thing to say, but but I stopped focusing on making things perfect and just worried about making them good enough. And
Yeah.
what I discovered was I wrote a lot of, you know, I wrote stuff that way that was better than what I wrote that when I tried to write stuff that was
Yes.
perfect.
Yeah,
Um,
because sometimes if you stop worrying about it being perfect, you get caught up in the joy of writing it,
that's
and it's
right.
the best
Something
stuff you
that
do.
yeah, because you had that joy at one
Yeah,
point, right? And then you decided to become a
exactly.
writer and forgot about
Hmm.
it.
Yeah.
All right, so that brings us to the end of our hour, and even a little more. Mary, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom and insights. And thanks to our audience for your great questions. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for attending. I really appreciate it. This is fun.
Yeah. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.